that, the Dairy Business Association has assembled an absolutely outstanding group of presenters for today's discussion. You'll hear from a Wisconsin dairyman that has several years of experience with an on-farm digester. You'll hear from a company that has deep expertise in digester operations. You will hear from a chief credit officer from another Wisconsin dairy on his view on low carbon and renewable natural gas markets. And you'll also hear from a legal expert with significant renewable energy expertise and how these projects are put together. In just a minute, I'll be giving each of these panelists a chance to introduce themselves and provide a brief background. Before we get there, I wanted to mention one more benefit that could play out with renewable natural gas projects as they get traction in the dairy industry. That is, the environmental benefits these projects can bring to the dairy and surrounding community is significant. When digesters first came on the scene, it was mainly for odor mitigation and power generation. However, there's great promise for the industry that some of these projects can incorporate a nutrient recovery system into their plan that could pay dividends by separating mining nutrients from the waste stream and placing these nutrients back on the fields, offsetting the use of some commercial fertilizer. This would be a win for the dairy and for the environment. Now it's time to meet our panel. Josh Meisner, partner in Normie Lane. Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Greg, thanks. Yeah, Josh Meisner, third generation dairy farm, central Wisconsin. Together with dairy and 36 employees, we milk 2,600 cows and farm about 4,500 acres. I'll be giving a little overview of where we're at with our dairy, where we've been, specifically with our digester and manure, some of the challenges, successes, and where we're going. So that's where we're at.
Thanks, Brock. Appreciate that. Next, Jessica Niekrasz, partner in Clean Fuel Partners. Jessica, tell us about yourself.
Greg, thanks so much. My name is Jessica Niekrasz. I'm the president at Clean Fuel Partners. We have a history of owning and operating digesters. We have moved just into the operational space, so I have lots of stories and hard-earned information to share with you guys this afternoon. Also, what we're doing to increase opportunity in the space in the state. Thanks a lot, Greg.
That's great, Jessica. I look forward to hearing that. Next up, Brian Dolski, a member of the management team of the Pagel Family of Businesses. Brian?
Hi, yes. Thanks, Greg. I'm Brian Dolski. I've been CFO for Pagel Family Businesses for almost 2 years now. Before that, I spent my entire career in the energy industry. So a little over 5 years in the CNG business, building and operating compressed natural gas fueling stations. Also spent a couple of years in the anaerobic digester project development space, primarily targeting food waste. In both roles, I was actively involved in the RFS and LCFS programs, so I have about 10 years experience in those markets. So yeah, very familiar with how manure is monetized in the RNG space. So.
Great, thanks, Brian. And rounding out our panel will be Jordan Hemaidan, partner with Michael Best. Jordan?
Well, thank you, Greg. I've been a lawyer at Michael Best for about 25 years now, came here right out of law school, and for much of the time I've been working with leaders in our firm in the ag sector, like Dave Krass. I've been privileged to work with a lot of farms on CAFO regulation issues, transaction issues, land use issues, and most recently now on helping Wisconsin farms and some developers put these renewable natural gas projects into place with all the agreements and so on. So look forward to sharing some of that.
Great, important part of the equation for sure. Thanks, Jordan. Now let's get started. Josh was going to be our first presenter and going to provide, as he said, a perspective of their digester experience, some successes and challenges and things that they've learned, and visit a little bit with us about working with a local utility. Josh, take it away.
All right, thanks, Greg. Yeah, so a little background. We did our big expansion in 2000, jumped from 400 cows up to 1,200, 1,500 back in 2000. We're kind of in expansion mode for a few years there. 2007, we were building 2 more barns. Digesters were happening in the state, and we decided to enter into a digester project. So what drove it? Yeah, like I said, mostly expansion mode. We toured other digesters we do in this industry. We went to different farms, talked to different people. We developed a relationship with our digester company, DBO. We looked at the state and federal monies that were available at the time to do these projects. And so yeah, we kicked it off. We completed the project in 2008. And I guess at that time we were one of roughly 15 on-farm digesters in the state that were either built or being built at that time. Roughly 75 others across the U.S. that were happening on-farm. So, and the vast majority of those were creating electricity. So as we were as well. So we also entered into a 5-year power purchase agreement with our utility, Dairyland Power, and kind of the rest was history from there. Worked really well. So some of the challenges, successes, our digester itself from the beginning worked very well. We kept it simple as far as the construction, the building of it. We had accurate retention time. We had consistent product going into it, and our digester it really worked well for whatever reason. Other digesters at the time, I know there were some that were struggling with the operation of itself, but for whatever reason, ours seemed to run really well. Really happy with it. The engine side of things, we ran on dirty gas. So we had at first it worked fairly well. After a while, the dirty gas started catching up to us. The service kind of fizzled with that project. And to make a long story short, our engine, I think it was in year 4, ended up being pretty well shot in a 6-year payback program. So we're in a very good position. However, went back to the drawing board, talked with DBO. They took the initiative to start working on a new relationship with another engine company. We also needed to expand our digester. At the time, we kind of outgrew it. Retention time was down. We had more cows going through it than we had initially planned. So we knocked the end wall out, made it bigger, sized it right, entered into a new agreement with a new engine company, got a new engine in here, put a new scrubber system in, and that whole has been running very well ever since. What have we learned? Digester benefits, I guess most of us know, the general benefits. We have a reduction in smell from our lagoons. We have surplus heat. On the separation side, we have flush water that we can run through our barns. And the big one for us is our bedding. That was one of the initial goals of doing this back when we added on the barns, that we were changing the way we were, where our cows were laying. We were going from mattresses and sawdust to deep bedded stalls. So the bedding is a big for us. And then the obvious, the big one is the gas capture. We're taking that gas and creating electricity. So currently we're in our 13th year with the digester, and our 3rd contract with Dairyland. We've been fortunate to renew these contracts after 13 years, whereas a lot of the bigger utilities across the state on farms haven't been so fortunate. Dairyland and our local utility, they've continued to find value in that green energy, and we've been in a position to be able to capture that. Our engine has ran very well. The new engine, we're maintaining a 95% runtime on that, and consistent power generation obviously helps the utility well. Financial status, kind of a break even on the operational side, so our utility sales minus our contract with the engine company, minus our operational costs, so our pumps and our separators, kind of a net zero there. And then you add the bedding, the bedding value on top of that, which we figure is about a $250,000 value, per year. And then the last, big benefit that we've, as with any project or any business, is the relationships that we built. So the relationship with our digester company, with our engine company, done some good things. We've set up some good relationships there, and I think that's going to help us going forward down the road. So what's next for Normie Lane? Actually, we put in a bedding dryer a year ago, so we're just about 1 year into that project. So we took our bedding from we were bedding off the separators, 65% moisture product going into underneath our cows. Decided to purchase a bedding dryer a year ago, improve our biosolids quality, and ultimately udder health. And we're definitely reaping the rewards of that project now a year later. Still on our power purchase agreement. However, that's going to be coming to an end here in another 1.5 to 2 years. So, what's next for us? We're looking down the road. And actually, we didn't think they were going to renew our third contract here a couple of years ago. So we actually had been looking at some of these CNG projects already at that time, and they kind of came in last minute and said, "Hey, we're gonna grandfather you in and renew you." So at the time, this CNG platform was fairly new, and we just decided to stay with the electrical sales for now. So down the road, we are looking at some of these new opportunities, and I think we're in a good position to be able to play in that category here in the near future. So that's kind of where we're at with things on the farm.
Thanks, Josh. I want to remind the audience to type in any questions they have into the chat feature, and we'll answer those at the conclusion of each speaker's presentation, if appropriate. And we also have time set aside at the end for question and answers as well. Hey, Josh, I do have one quick question for you before we move on. On a weekly basis, from Normie Lane's perspective, how many hours a week do you need to set aside for operations, management, maintenance, upkeep of the digester?
I think I caught most of what you were asking. Management in that time and our labor time. Yeah, we don't. Like I said, we set things up, fairly simple. We don't. I'd say we have a guy maybe half time during the week that's devoted just to the digester, to the equipment, to the dryer. So that whole system is just pretty labor friendly on our end.
Great. Thanks, Josh. And again, if you have questions for Josh, please type them into the chat box. Next up is going to be Jessica Niekrasz, and her expertise is obviously on the operations side of the digester. And as she mentioned in her opening comments, she's got lots of good, bad, and sideways stories about operating digesters. And so with that, we'd like to turn over the discussion to Jessica.
Great, thanks, Greg. I'm not going to tell anybody watching right now anything they don't know about manure. It's hard to work with. It is corrosive. It's a tough medium. And when digester facilities are built, there's like grand plans. Generally, what we've seen over the years is that, the first 1 to 2 years, a facility runs amazingly well because everything's new and sparkly. And then you get to years 3, 4, 5, 6, and, things start wearing out because of the interactive nature and the hydrogen sulfide and the ammonia that come out. And that's when, farmers want to farm, and operational, management companies want to operate and manage. So that's where we came in. We purchased the digester outside of Wanakee back in December of 2015. It had a pretty storied past, had some challenges that were newsworthy, and so our goal was to stabilize, develop a regular maintenance schedule and then work toward making the improvements that were necessary to have this hum and potentially reach, a profitable status. The good, bad, and different on it is we got to break even with it. When we reached break even, I would say that was 2017, 2018, we could see our power purchase agreement expiring in the relatively near future. And so things were humming, we understood it. We also managed a facility for the Crave Brothers farm. So we sort of pooled our experience, gathered all the information we needed, and we thought, you know what, we're not going to make this investment into RNG. That is the opportunity that's on the horizon for facilities that lose their power purchase agreements. The interesting thing, and Josh, I really appreciate what you said, is that you've been fortunate enough to have your PPAs renewed, and because the digester system is it's embedded into the farm processes, you get other benefits like being able to use the excess heat and creating bedding. In farm facilities, the electricity, even when the power purchase agreement runs out, still has benefits for the farm. Facilities where multiple farms pipe in or truck in manure and then you lose a power purchase agreement, there's no benefit to the owner or operator of that facility to continue to do that when the power purchase agreement runs out. And then RNG really currently is the answer to the next stage. Being a really small company, we decided that we would choose to sell the facility, which happened in 2019, and in 2020, the RNG facility came online, owned by the new owners, Brightmark. So now we're gaining all this new experience about installing RNG systems. This is the first winter that we're going to experience operating this on behalf of the owners. And as we all know, digester systems in the winter, a little bit tougher circumstances to operate. So, these are interesting lessons that we're learning, and a lot of information gathered in the process. Farmers' first concern is, to do your business, to do what you do well. To be part of a digester now is actually a really great opportunity for the farm community. RNG systems they take a lot of investment, but because of the markets that are out there, they also pay pretty well, which opens up an opportunity for revenue streams for farms if you can get paid for your manure. That's a super exciting aspect of what's moving forward in the future. And then to pivot, our biggest challenge as operators is to have qualified talent to run these facilities. And what I mean by that, you not only need people who are willing to get down in the pits and turn wrenches and pull out pumps and do that kind of work. You need problem solvers, people who can do this on the fly. And it's any fix that happens in a biological system, such as a digester, wherever you fix it, there are going to be impacts before and after that fix. And so you not only need somebody who can do the work, but somebody who can see the bigger picture and the impact of the work that's being done. So that's the training piece that we see missing. And to that end, we have gone and started to identify what needs to happen for the industry in order for more qualified, more trained people to be deployed onto these systems throughout the state, it will be a limiting factor in being able to expand more facilities in Wisconsin. And we are in the process of formalizing a training program at Clean Fuel Partners to help with this. So those are the biggest, the biggest challenges I see is, and just to sum it all up, is it's an unpredictable and challenging environment. We are dealing with, the fact that manure likes to eat metal for breakfast, that even with the best laid maintenance plans, things can go wrong. And because of that, you need people who can see what the challenge, where the problem lies, and what the potential impacts of a fix is. And then we finally need to address creating a workforce of qualified digester operators. And I think that about sums everything up, unless I've missed something.
Jessica, while it's top of mind, you mentioned something about a training program. When would that be available if a dairy operation wanted to put a employee through that training program?
Greg, that's thanks for asking that. We are in early stages and we are doing this process internally to see how it works for us. And at that point, then we would be able to roll it out. So what I would say is, shameless marketing plug, follow Clean Fuel Partners on one of the media platforms or send me an email. You can find my email address on our website, and I will be sure to keep you in the loop.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jessica. Appreciate it. Now on to our next speaker, Brian Dolski. Brian, take off your mic when you're ready. And Brian is going to speak to kind of what happens to the renewable natural gas once it's produced, what are the options, where it goes, kind of how the credit markets operate for those, for that renewable natural gas. Brian, it's yours.
All right, cool. Thanks, Greg. So after the gas is made, there's really two pathways that need to get demonstrated in order to be able to generate credits that you can sell and monetize the manure. So first is demonstrating a physical pathway. So depending on the farm's location, if you have an interstate pipeline within 5 miles, consider yourself very lucky. Those that aren't in close proximity to an interstate pipeline may need to pump the gas into tube trailers and truck it to the nearest interstate pipeline. But requirements, you need to get it into an interstate pipeline that is also connected to other interstate pipelines, which ultimately could theoretically end up in California, where it would end up going through a compressed natural gas fueling station and sold as transportation fuel. So demonstrating that physical pathway is more challenging for some than others, depending on your particular project location. So after the physical pathway, you have to demonstrate a contractual pathway that the environmental attributes of that renewable natural gas actually the title is transferred from the project producer to the CNG end user who is using it as transportation fuel. So typically that involves, and there's a bunch of different ways it can be done, but typically that involves the producer selling it to a gas marketer. That gas marketer is who it takes title of the gas while it's on the interstate pipelines, and then it gets sold to a CNG company who owns the CNG fueling stations where it gets dispensed and sold as vehicle fuel. And then on the tail end of that, you also have credit brokers who are in the business of matching up buyers and sellers of these RNG credits. So physical pathway, contractual pathway, and then just being cognizant of RNG is really two different assets. It's the physical gas itself. Some people call it the brown gas. And then there's the environmental attributes, or the green gas portion of it. And they really are separate. They go in separate directions once they hit the pipe, because the physical gas, more often than not, never makes it to California. It just goes downstream to the nearest utility city gate, or it gets burned. It usually never makes it there, but the environmental attributes do, and you have to follow these pathway requirements to make sure that you can connect the dots in the value chain, so to speak. So so the next item is just, what RNG markets are out there. So the big one, value-wise, the biggest one is California's low carbon fuel standard. So that's a program that was put in place around 2010. It's currently scheduled to out through 2030. So it has quite a bit of longevity to it. And what it does is it mandates greenhouse gas emission reductions for the transportation fuel industry in the state of California. So every fuel gets its own carbon footprint, gets its own score, and the better your score, the more credits you get. So the CNG market itself is kind of a niche market in California. Frankly, there's about 200 million gallons worth of demand roughly in California. So in the grand scheme of things, renewable fuels like renewable diesel, ethanol, electricity, or the EV market are much bigger players overall. But the CNG market, even though it is a niche, it still has plenty of room to support a lot of RNG projects from dairy digesters, because those projects have such a low CI score. They're always going to be first in line. So they'll displace a landfill project or a food waste digester project because the avoided emissions credit that is given to dairy digesters, they generate more credits per unit of energy than any other type of fuel that's out there. So just to put it in context, if a milking cow generates about 150 gallons worth of fuel, if the market out there is 200 million gallons, you're talking enough capacity to hold 10 to 15% of the U.S. dairy herd. So it's still a massive market for the dairy industry, massive market opportunity. Just one thing I would note about that market is that growth in the CNG space has kind of plateaued, just given low diesel prices over the last couple of years and the growth of the EV, the electric vehicle market. So just things to keep in mind. But there's still, given the current footprint, there's still plenty of room for growth in this space. So yeah, in addition to the California program is the federal program, the RFS program. So this was passed during the Bush years. It's been around a long time. I believe mid-2000s the program first started. It's set to sunset here in 2022, I believe, in terms of what the mandated volumes are for each type of renewable fuel. But with Biden getting into office as president and the friendliness towards the renewable fuel industry and climate initiatives, I think this program is going to be on fairly stable footing here for the next 4 years. But in general, the CNG market for the federal program is about almost 400 million gallons. So it's almost twice the size of the California program. So you can participate in both if you are able to sell your RNG in the state of California, but if you're not, the market is plenty big outside of the state of California. But keep in mind, if you sell your RNG outside of the state of California, then you don't get the LCFS credit. So obviously a tremendous incentive to try and get it into the state of California. So yeah, last item, just where the money is made on these credits. So just try and put some numbers to this. If a milking cow, and again, there's a lot of variables that go into this. If you're bedding with sand, the type of breed of cow you have, how you farm. But in general, roughly 20 MMBTUs per cow is just a good rough rule of thumb. The physical gas itself might be worth $3 an MMBTU. So you're talking $60 per cow per year for the value of the natural gas itself, or the methane itself. The RIN credits today, the federal credits are about $1.50 a RIN, which translates to roughly $17 in MMBTU. So if a cow's producing roughly 20 MMBTUs, $17 in MMBTU, you're talking about $340 per cow per year on the federal credit. The LCFS credit probably has the most variation in terms of trying to get it down to value per cow per year, because there are so many different elements that go into calculating your CI score. It's a much more robust calculation versus the federal program. You just basically have to hit a threshold and you get the credit. With the LCFS program, every project is unique and every project gets its own unique score. So there's a lot that can alter these numbers, but roughly in general, you're talking maybe 4 metric tons or 4 credits per cow. The current credit price is $200 per ton or $200 per credit. So that's $800 per cow per year in LCFS value. So if you add that all up, that's about $1,200 per cow per year. Now, keep in mind, about 5 years ago, this was under $500 per cow per year. So I remember selling LCFS credits for $20 a ton, and now they're $200 a ton. So we've seen a lot of volatility to the upside in these markets, I would say, over the last couple of years. So there's, it could go back the other way. Who knows? But one other item worth noting on that front in terms of the value per cow is that if California does mandate methane capture on the dairies, that would have an adverse impact to the value that gets placed on the project itself if you are producing biogas from a digester, because you are no longer going above and beyond what state law requires. So there is the potential out there. It's not set in stone yet. They floated some dates out there when they may mandate that. If that mandate does come to fruition, though, you could see the LCFS value in terms of how many credits per cow get generated cut significantly. So so there's a lot of moving parts. A lot of mulch to feed. When I throw out $1,200 per cow per year, that sounds fantastic, but that has to get shared amongst all of the players and all of the people that need to be involved in connecting the value chain. So if you think back to the contractual pathway, not only the producer, but the gas marketer, the CNG company, the credit broker. So there's a lot of people that need to get involved to connect the value chain, and they all take their cut, but obviously the producer gets the lion's share of that. So, and then I just, in closing, want to echo Greg's comments at the beginning about, the CNG, or the kind of, regardless of the price or the value or being able to monetize digester gas for dollars. I think as the industry moves towards a net zero future and really being aware of the carbon footprint of and trying to minimize that carbon footprint, that these digesters are going to play a huge role in minimizing the carbon footprint of manure. So thank you.
Thanks, Brian. There's a lot packed into that short presentation. One item I'm going to mention as a follow-up to Brian's comments is if a operation is trying to evaluate this opportunity and wants to track the daily markets for low carbon fuel credits, RINs, and natural gas, I'll have the DBA staff send this out, but it's ecoengineers.com, and you'll get a feed to your inbox every day with the daily markets of those 3 credits. Thanks again, Jordan. Or, excuse me. Thanks again, Brian. Next up is Jordan from Michael Best, and the topics that Jordan's going to share with us is kind of to continue on the discussion that Brian started on the programs available. Where Jordan really comes into play is how these deals are put together, how they're structured for the best interest of the mutual parties, and continue to look at new developing opportunities. With that, Jordan, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Greg. So Brian really created a very nice segue because he laid out for you where the value is in these projects. And it's clear that right now and for the foreseeable future, that value is going to be in the low carbon fuel standard attributes. The value of those things is multiple times what the value of other attributes are now, and people are behaving accordingly. So many of the CAFOs out in Wisconsin have, for the past few years, likely entertained a lot of visits and phone calls and emails from developers who want to develop these projects. So let me break down how these, how these relationships can work. If you're a farm that has a manure stream and no digester, the developers weren't initially really interested. They were interested in the farms that already had on-site digesters. And what they were doing is going to those farms and saying, hey, I want to enter into a biogas purchase agreement with you, and they would buy the gas for a fixed amount. And at the beginning of this whole run, what these developers were doing was offering pretty much just a hold harmless plus a little bit of a sweetener, meaning we will pay you for the brown gas, as Brian termed it. We will pay you for, we will offset whatever credits you were getting before, the carbon offsets or the electric utility revenue that you were getting from generating fuel, and plus, and we'll give you some more. Not incredibly a lot more, but it took a lot off the farmer's plate, right? Because now someone else was dealing with that biogas coming out of the digester. So that would typically just entail a biogas purchase agreement, but then again, you've got to deal with the fact that the developer is going to be on site. So you have to have a lease agreement with the developer where you allocate all the risks of that person now being on your production site. So that's a real estate agreement. Usually the compensation doesn't come under the lease agreement, it comes more under the biogas purchase agreement. If you didn't have a digester, now the next sort of phase was the developers are coming in thinking, wow, we're going to make so much money from this, we can afford to go out and get the financing, either equity or debt, and put both a digester and an RNG skid on the production site. So what we'll do is we'll buy the farm's manure, and that's the next sort of phase of deals we saw. So that would be a manure purchase agreement and plus the lease. Under the manure purchase agreement, the kind of risks that the farms need to think about are, okay, who carries the risk of manure that doesn't really meet the developer's expectations coming into the digester? How much is the farm going to commit to, certain chemical constituent levels? How much is the farm going to be willing to divert waste streams away from the digester that might otherwise have gone there? Who's going to pay for any capital expansion or alteration that has to happen in order to make that manure compliant with the California rules, for example? Those are all questions that have to be answered there. The other thing to remember is that in order for the developers to justify this kind of an investment, these agreements, biogas purchase and or manure purchase, they're out 20 years with 5 or 10 year extensions. That's a generation's worth of a relationship. So the farms want to be very careful about what that looks like and how the risks are allocated. And that's what we do mostly. And we've worked for both farms and developers, certainly not one against the other in the same transaction. We can't do that and won't do that. But what we see on the farm side is you have to be very careful about who gets what risk. So that so far covers, I think, the first 3, 4, 5 years of this kind of development. What we've been seeing over the last year or two, and I've had some involvement in developing, is where we see developers coming in now who they may not have the same capitalization as some of the bigger developers, but they're coming in and they're saying, hey, let's partner with the farms. We'll bring our expertise and we'll create a joint entity, for example, and we'll work on this together. It's a very, very complex set of relationships, but bottom line is, there's starting to be situations where the farms actually have an interest, an economic and a legal interest in the production of this RNG and the revenue that comes out of it. Finally, the last sort of structure, and there's myriads of in-betweens here, But I'll just say the last category of structure is where the farm just does it itself. Now, sort of echoing what Jessica said, you know, farms often want to engage close to their knitting. They want to milk cows. Okay, they don't want to fix digesters. They don't want to run trucks to the pipeline and so on and so forth. But some farms are starting to see large enough, sophisticated enough, well capitalized enough, or with good enough relations with their creditors that, hey, maybe we can do this. We'll just get the experts together and let's see. Now, I know of one that's successfully done that in Wisconsin. I think, you know, farms need to think about the kind of risks that Brian Dolski just described, which is what's going to happen to this LCFS price. It's not guaranteed. You know, butterfly flaps its wings in China, an earthquake happens somewhere else, right? So you can't account for those things. You can't look ahead and be certain about those things. So it depends on how much risk the actors want to take along that chain of mouths needing to get fed, as Brian talked about, and go into it with eyes wide open if you're going to be spending the money. So I think we're a little bit over where we wanted to be. Greg, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jordan. You know, just to take advantage of the opportunity for the questions that have come in, we have several good ones that have come in. And since it's top of mind right here, I'm going to toss this one over to Jordan. And I think you're in a good position to answer this. And when starting a manure project, who should all be on your team to have the most successful project possible?
Well, I think what you need to do first is decide how much do you want to participate in the project. Let's talk about the three categories I told you. If you're going to be just selling your commodity, your gas or your manure to someone else, then what you want on your team is, number one, somebody who can analyze what the value of your manure and or gas is, right? Independently of what a developer might be telling you. Okay, so you have a good understanding of where your value is going into the relationship so that you can be in a good informed position to negotiate the contracts with those developers. So that's who you'd want on a team. And then second, obviously, you would want good legal counsel to make sure that those risks were being allocated appropriately, all the risks are being identified, and the project's done in a way that would be enforceable in court or otherwise if things went badly later. Now, going to the next one where you've got some combination of the farm and a developer owning and operating these projects, you're going to need more technical expertise. You're going to need more economic/accounting expertise, like what Brian brings to the table for his organization, because you're going to want to be able to manage the economics of it other than just collecting that check every month. You're going to be now a cost center as well, right? So you're going to have someone on your team for that. If you're part of that partnership, is you're going to be running the digester and the developer is going to be running the RNG skid, well, you're going to have, as Jessica indicated, you're going to have people who are knowledgeable and can resolve these problems day to day without any compromise to the farm's core operation. If you're going to be owning the project, the farm's going to be owning the project all on its own, you're going to need the entire suite of, quote, mouths to feed that Brian was talking about. You're going to need financial consulting expertise on the value of the commodity that you're going to be producing. You're going to need someone to manage the construction of these assets. You're going to need someone to manage either injection into the pipeline on site, if you're lucky enough to have a pipeline running through the property, or the transportation, not only to get the CNG to the interstate pipeline, but also a contract with somebody who can inject it for you, which is going to be the pipeline company. You're going to need contracts on your team. You're going to need someone to advise you on the contracts for the offtake in California and the dispensation. And then finally, you're going to need somebody who's really good at making sure that everything you've done down that whole pipeline is in compliance with all especially with the California regulation, so that you can ultimately monetize that gas. So, and the credits, more importantly. So that your team is going to be much more expansive. So you go from, on one extreme, you just need a consultant to tell you what your manure is worth and a good lawyer, all the way to now you need consultants and experts for every step of where that gas gets made and dispensed.
Thanks, Jordan. And I'm going to make a comment from a lender perspective. It'd be our recommendation that you bring your lender into this discussion, make sure that they understand what agreements might be required of you and of the lender to participate in the project, and how that impacts your working relationship with your primary lender. There's manure supply agreements, there's land leases, there's non-disturbance agreements. There's a number of things that you'll want to make sure that you bring your lender in the loop on. And as Jordan referred to, it really does depend on what the scope of the project is and how much risk you're taking. Next question would be for Josh and Brian, if you could both respond to this, is what sort of issues did you have with the local township and county when installing a digester? Was it a challenge? Was there opposition, or were they supportive?
Yeah, I guess in our situation, we really didn't have any issues. We're fortunate to be in a pretty good area where, fairly, very rural, fairly remote, and just a good dairy area where we didn't have any issues, I guess, on that end. No.
Yeah, for Pagel installed before my time, but my understanding is the same thing. There was no issues or roadblocks. Pretty supportive in the community.
Good. Next question. You kind of answered it to some degree, and maybe Brian and maybe Jessica, you can weigh in on this and on where you think things are headed. But the question is, things are constantly changing, and if we make an investment in a digester, will they be relevant 5 years down the road, and what is the positive outlook of it? What is the longevity to it? I'll preface that a little bit with the fact that there is I believe 2 states that have a low carbon fuel standard credit in place at this moment, and there's 7 other states that are considering that. Let's Jessica, if you wouldn't mind following up on the rest of that answer. I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. There are other low carbon fuel standard markets available. Oregon has one for sure, and I've also heard whisperings about creating a Midwest LCFS. So these are conversations that are, sort of going on because biogas has changed a lot, mostly because the way our experience has been, the way the industry was built up was based on how Europe was doing digesters, but they were doing it to actually pay to create energy and reduce their reliance on Russian natural gas. So we learned a lot of things about how it would work in the US. And so it's kind of a constantly changing landscape.
Sure. The bottom line is it's a evolving industry, both from a policy standpoint and a social movement standpoint, and that there's going to continue to be very similar to probably electric vehicles, that there's a certain amount of momentum that this industry is going to have, regardless of state policies and maybe federal policies. That's going to move the industry forward and move possibly right now it's available where there's actually an independent market that's available that can be supported by the economics and not a mandated market. And I don't know if anyone on the panel would like to comment to that.
Yeah, I just add, I think it's an investment in sustainability that these credit programs may come and go and pop up and sunset, but just over time, the migration and evolution towards sustainable practices, not just for the dairy industry, but just industry in general. It's I think digesters, like I said in my remarks, play a big role in that. So
Sure. We have one more question, and it's a straightforward question, but one that probably gets asked a lot. And yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe both Brian and Jordan, you can respond to it. Jordan, I'll give it to you first because of your experience on putting the deals together. But there are a couple questions on what's the minimum size that a farm needs to be to justify a digester? Jordan, could you respond to that?
In my experience, I have not seen, for the LCFS investments that I spent the time talking about today, I have not seen anything less than about 1,500 cows, and that was on the very low end. Typically, we're looking at 2,000 and above. And some developers want to see 3,000. It all depends on how much risk they want to take. But I certainly haven't seen anything less than 1,500 at this point. And even in that case, I think there was some supplemental manure coming from, not a lot, but some extra coming from a neighboring farm.
Sure.
yeah, no, I'd agree with that. It really is site specific. If you're sitting on top of a pipeline versus having to truck the gas, that would really affect the number of cows you'd really need to make it pencil out. And like Jordan said, what your risk tolerance is in terms of your break even and how much risk you're willing to take. So.
Good. Well, thanks. Well, our question and answer time period has come to an end here. I would like to really thank the slate of speakers that we had this afternoon, Brian, Jessica, Jordan, and Josh, for their insights, their perspectives, sharing their experiences with us. Thank you very much. I'd also like to, you're welcome.